You had the rate lock page open on your phone the way you had every morning that week, 7.12. You refreshed it and the number turned red, 7.25. Nothing you can point to caused it. The Federal Reserve didn't hike, inflation didn't spike, the jobs report was boring, but that little red number added about $130 to your payment every month for 30 years. So why did it move? The answer is a man in Tokyo you will never meet, making one small, reasonable decision at his desk, and that decision reaching across an ocean to pick your pocket. This isn't a story about a number getting too big. It's a story about who is still willing to hold that number and what quietly happens the day they stop. My name is Nick, and today we're talking about the beginning of the US debt collapse, which has already started. It just doesn't look like a collapse. It looks like a normal Tuesday. Let me show you why. Here's the thing everybody gets wrong about the national debt. They stare at the size of it, and the size is genuinely absurd. As I'm recording this, the US government owes somewhere around $39 trillion. That number is so large it stops meaning anything, so let me shrink it. The interest alone, just the rent on money already borrowed, now runs past $1 trillion a year. That works out to roughly $32,000 a second. In the time it took me to say that sentence, the government borrowed more than most people make in a year, purely to pay interest on money it borrowed a long time ago. And that interest bill just quietly passed something it was never supposed to pass. The United States now spends more every year servicing its debt than it spends on its entire military. Let that sit for a second. The most expensive army in human history is now the cheaper line item. We are paying more for yesterday than we are paying to defend tomorrow. But here's the part that actually matters. The size of the debt is not the dangerous part. A big number just sits there. What's dangerous is the machine underneath it and the way that machine feeds itself. Because when the government can't cover its spending, it borrows, and the borrowing adds interest, and the interest gets added to the spending it couldn't cover in the first place. So next year it has to borrow even more at rates that keep climbing as the old cheap debt expires and gets rolled into new expensive debt. It is the exact financial position of a person paying their credit card minimum with a second credit card. You already know how that story ends. You've just never watched a country do it in real time. And this isn't some fringe theory whispered on the internet. The people who run Wall Street's biggest banks and hedge funds have started saying it out loud in that careful, lawyered way rich people talk when they're nervous. One of them has called the debt the single biggest threat facing the country. Another keeps warning that America is walking toward a moment where the math simply stops working. When the people who profit most from the system start quietly narrating its cracks, it's usually worth looking up from your phone. Spread that trillion-dollar interest bill across every household in the country, and it comes out to somewhere around $7,000 or $8,000 a year per family just to cover the interest. You never get a bill for it. You just pay it in 100 small ways you never trace back. For years, none of this mattered, and there's a very specific reason why. Somebody was always there to buy. Which brings me to the man in Tokyo. Let's call him Kenji. Kenji manages money for a large Japanese institution, and for basically his entire career, his job was boring in the best possible way. Money came in, and he parked a big chunk of it in United States treasuries. American government debt, the safest asset on earth. He didn't do it out of love for America. He did it because Japan had kept its own rates near zero for a generation, and there was simply nothing to earn at home. So the smart move was to send the money across the Pacific, where at least the debt paid something. Kenji and thousands of people like him became a kind of invisible foundation under the entire US Treasury market, so reliable that America stopped noticing they were even there. You don't thank the floor for holding you up, you just assume it always will, and then in 2025 the floor moved. Japan's central bank finally ended its long experiment with free money and started raising rates. By the end of the year, Japanese interest rates sat at the highest level in 3 decades. Now, that increase sounds tiny. We are talking fractions of a percent. But for Kenji, it changed everything because suddenly he could earn a safe return in his own currency at home without the hassle of converting yen into dollars and back. The whole reason to ship money overseas started to disappear, and for the first time in his career, Kenji had a reason to bring the money home. Not to panic, not to dump, just to, buy a little less next time, to let some of those American bonds mature and quietly not replace them. Multiply that one calm, rational decision across an entire generation of money, and you get a problem. Because at the exact moment America needed to sell more debt than ever before in its history, one of its most loyal buyers started politely stepping back from the table. And here's the twist that almost nobody talks about. It's not just that the foreign buyers are getting quieter, it's who replaced them. As recently as a couple of years ago, the biggest overseas holders of American debt were foreign governments and central banks. Patient, boring institutions like Kenji's, buyers who hold on through a bad quarter because they're playing a decades-long game. But that changed. Foreign private investors, the hedge funds and asset managers and leverage traders quietly overtook the governments as the largest foreign holders of US debt. And those players are not patient. Their entire job is to move the instant conditions shift. So the market didn't just lose a buyer, it swapped its calmest, most reliable shock absorber for a hair trigger. The floor didn't disappear. It got nervous, and nervous money behaves in a very specific way. Patient money, Kenji's kind, holds through a scary headline because it's playing a 30-year game. Nervous money reads the same headline and hits sell before lunch. So the real danger was never a dramatic afternoon of foreigners dumping American debt. It's subtler than that. It's that the buyers who are left will demand a little more interest to take the risk and bolt a little faster the moment things wobble. You don't need a crash to break a market, you just need everyone in it to start standing a little closer to the exit. So now you understand the setup. The debt is compounding, the loyal money is drifting home, and the money that's left is twitchy. Which means we finally get to answer the question from the very beginning. Why did your mortgage move on a week when nothing happened? Here's the chain, and it's shorter than you'd think. When holders like Kenji buy fewer treasuries or sell the ones they've got, the price of those bonds falls. And when a bond's price falls, its yield, the interest it pays, goes up. That's just seesaw mechanics. Now, American mortgage rates are not set by the Federal Reserve. They are built on top of the 10-year Treasury yield. Banks take that yield and stack their own cut on top, and that's your mortgage. So when yields climb, your rate climbs with them on a Tuesday for no reason you could possibly see from your kitchen table. Economists at one regional Federal Reserve bank put a number on it. A single big month of foreign selling could shove US yields up by more than half a percentage point. Drop that onto a normal American home loan, and you're looking at an extra $130 a month, every month, for 30 years, paid by a family that has never heard the name Kenji and never will. And the pressure isn't only coming from across the ocean, it's also building right down the street. Meet the second character in this story. Let's call her Rosa. Rosa is a loan officer at a regional bank in a mid-sized American town. Not a Wall Street giant, the kind of bank where small businesses get their credit line and first-time buyers get their mortgage. And Rosa is sitting on a slow-motion problem because her bank, like a lot of regional banks, holds a big pile of commercial real estate loans. Office buildings, strip malls, hotels, and here's the ugly little secret of commercial property. Those loans don't slowly pay themselves off like your house does. They come due all at once in one giant balloon payment, and then they have to be refinanced. Well over $1 trillion of that debt came due recently, with hundreds of billions more stacked right behind it. And all of it was borrowed years ago, back when rates were near zero and those buildings were worth a fortune. Now the loans are landing in a completely different world. Rates are dramatically higher and half-empty office towers are worth dramatically less because a whole lot of workers just never came back to the office. So the math on refinancing doesn't work anymore. There isn't enough rent coming in to cover the new payment. So what does Rosa's bank do? It does the thing every bank does when it doesn't want to admit a loss. It extends the loan and pretends. That's the actual industry nickname, by the way. Extend and pretend. Which is a strategy in exactly the same way that not opening your credit card statement is a strategy. Push the deadline out another year or two, keep the loan looking healthy on paper, and pray conditions improve. Individually, every one of those decisions sounds reasonable, but across the whole system, the losses don't disappear. They just sit there in the dark, quietly piling up. And a bank sitting on a pile of quiet losses does one predictable thing. It gets cautious. It says no to the small business that wanted to expand and no to the young couple that wanted the mortgage. So look at where that leaves you. Standing in the middle, on one side, the money from abroad is thinning out, pushing your rates up. On the other side, the credit at home is tightening, making everything harder to borrow. Two separate pressure points, an ocean apart, both squeezing the same person. And that person is you. Now, this is the part of the video where a lesser channel would tell you to buy gold, move to a bunker, and start bartering with canned beans. So let me stop and do the responsible thing, which is argue the other side as hard as I possibly can. Because the case against panic is genuinely strong, and you deserve to hear it. The United States is not Greece. This is the single most important thing to understand. And it's the thing the doom sellers conveniently skip. America borrows in its own currency, the dollar, which it also happens to print. That is a cheat code. A country that owes money in a currency it controls can never be forced to default the way a household or a business or even Greece can. It literally cannot run out of the thing it makes. When the bill comes due, it can always, at the absolute worst, create the dollars to pay it. So a sudden, dramatic, we're out of money default, that's basically off the table. And if you want proof that high debt doesn't automatically mean collapse, just look back at Kenji's own country. Japan has been carrying a debt more than twice the size of its entire economy for decades. Ratios that would supposedly trigger the apocalypse. And Japan is still here, still functioning, still one of the richest nations on the planet. On top of that, people have been screaming that the US debt would end America since the 1980s, as every single one of them, so far, has been wrong. Betting on the collapse of the United States has been one of the losingest trades in financial history. If you'd sold everything every time someone waved a scary debt chart at you, you'd have missed 40 years of getting richer. So take a breath, unbookmark the Goldcoin website. But, and you knew there was a but, here's the trap in all of that comfort. Every single one of those reassurances is true. And that's exactly why the collapse won't look like a collapse. Because think about what we just established. They can't be forced to default. They can always print the dollars. So when the debt genuinely becomes too heavy to carry the honest way, that is the door they walk through. They don't miss a payment. They pay every bill right on time in full with dollars that are quietly worth a little less each year. That's the whole trick. The collapse isn't an explosion, it's an erosion. It's inflation doing the exact job a default would do, just slowly enough that you blame the grocery store instead of the government. This has a polite academic name. It's called financial repression, and it is the oldest move in the book. The name is boring on purpose. Nobody has ever marched in the street over a phrase like financial repression, which is precisely why they picked it. Historically, it's how nearly every government has dealt with a mountain of debt it couldn't otherwise pay. Not with a dramatic reckoning, but by keeping interest rates a hair below inflation for years, so the debt slowly shrinks in real terms while your savings slowly melt. The debt gets paid down, it's just paid down out of your bank account, in slow motion without a single vote being cast, and there's a second bill hiding behind that one. Every dollar the government burns on interest is a dollar that can't go anywhere else. Roads, defense, the programs your parents are counting on, the interest doesn't just quietly melt your savings, it eats the budget from the inside, crowding out everything the money was supposed to do in the first place. The debt starts paying for itself, and everyone else gets whatever's left. You are the repayment plan. You just never got a say in it. Yeah, it's the raise you were proud of for about 3 weeks, right up until the grocery receipt quietly swallowed the whole thing. It's the checking account that somehow buys less at the end of the year than it did at the start, even though the number never dropped. That gap, that quiet little gap, is the interest payment on a debt you never personally signed for. And if this is the first time anyone has walked you through how this machine actually works, that gap between what they tell you and what's really happening, that's the entire reason I built a school community for this. It's where we go past the headlines and break down exactly how the system moves, and more importantly, what you can actually do to sit on the right side of it instead of quietly funding it. The link is in the description. It's free to start, and it's the most useful room I know of for people who'd rather understand the game than get played by it. Now, because they can't just print money forever without setting inflation on fire, there's a backstop being built for the days the market truly freezes up. When yields spike and nobody wants to buy, the Federal Reserve has quietly become the buyer of last resort, not just for American banks, but for the whole global dollar system. Here's how strange it's gotten. There's now a permanent facility where a foreign central bank that suddenly needs dollars can hand its American treasuries to the Federal Reserve like collateral at a pawn shop and walk away with cash, no fire sale required. A pawn shop for entire countries. Same basic idea as the one down the block, just with better lighting and a lot more zeros. It was set up as a temporary thing during the pandemic, meant to last 6 months. It never left. It just quietly became furniture. Tools invented as emergency measures meant for rare moments of crisis have quietly been made permanent. And here's the problem with that. When you use the emergency exit every single day, it stops being an emergency exit. It just becomes the hallway. Rare stops meaning rare. The safety net stops being a net and becomes the floor everyone's standing on, and nobody wants to ask what happens if it ever gives. So let's bring Kenji and Rosa back, because their stories are really the same story wearing two costumes. Kenji calmly bringing his money home, one boring decision at a time. Rosa quietly extending a loan she knows is underwater, hoping tomorrow fixes it. Neither of them is a villain. Neither of them is panicking. Neither of them thinks they're doing anything historic. They're both just being completely reasonable inside a system that no longer rewards patience. And that's the thing about this kind of collapse. It doesn't need a villain. It doesn't need a crash. It just needs a few million reasonable people to each make a small, sensible choice, all leaning the same direction at once. And every one of those choices, Kenji's in Tokyo and Rosa's downtown, ends up in the same place, the same mortgage payment, on the same kitchen table, in a house neither of them will ever see. Which is why when people ask me if the debt collapse is coming, I have to correct the tense. It's not a forecast, it's a description. The loyal money is already drifting home. The buyers who replaced it are already twitchy. The interest is already compounding faster than the economy can grow. The emergency tools are already permanent, and your dollar is already, right now, quietly buying a little less than it did last year. None of that is a prediction of some dramatic future event. That is a photograph of this exact moment. The beginning already happened. You just didn't get an announcement, because collapses that arrive on schedule and default in public are the rare kind. This is the common kind, the kind that shows up as a slightly higher mortgage rate on a quiet Tuesday and asks you to assume it's nothing. So no, you don't need the bunker, but you do need to stop watching the wrong number. The size of the debt was never going to be the thing that got you. The slow, quiet transfer, the gap between your raise and your rent, the erosion, you were trained to blame on everything except the machine that's actually causing it. That's the thing. Now you can see it, and the people who can see the game being played are historically the ones who don't end up paying for it. The rest just get a slightly higher payment every month for 30 years and never once wonder about a man in Tokyo they'll never meet.